I acknowledge to being the oldest, by far, it looks like. My name is Marjorie Legay. I'm Kevin Spencer's mother. His Krishna name is Shuti Das. And I've practiced law in Orange County longer than any of you have been alive, and enjoyed it thoroughly and still do. Kevin wanted me to talk about Prabhupada, or whoever asked Kevin to ask me, and also a little bit about my experiences with Krishna consciousness. So I'd like to start with that, if I may. I first learned about Krishna consciousness in 1969, I believe, in Laguna Beach, when the Laguna Temple started in a little house out in Laguna Canyon, a very modest place, with about 10 members. And Kevin's philosophy teacher got him interested, and then I thought I'd better find out a little bit about it too. So I became rather well acquainted with that group, and in 1970, my family took a trip on Kevin's high school graduation to Europe, and we lost him over there. In Paris, we went to a well-known restaurant in the Latin Quarter, and the devotees were all out in front singing and chanting. So when we ended our trip through Europe, as we had planned, he said he wanted to go back to Paris and stay there. And so we thought, well, okay. And we put him on the train in Zurich, wasn't it? And I didn't see him for a long time. I visited the Paris temple in the winter of '71, and that was an experience too. For those of you who know Paris, it was in the 14e arrondissement, which is way, way out from the center of town, and past the Montparnasse, and they lived in a little 2 or 3 story, I mean, it was on the 2nd or 3rd story apartment. As I recall, there were only 8 or 10 of them, led by Hari Vilas, who was from Chicago or Michigan. This was in Paris. And even with that small group, and clear back in 1971, they made their presence very well known. They went on Sankirtan all over the streets, and I went with them a few times, and sometimes they were well received, but I remember the slop bucket that was thrown on us from some house. And they also gave lectures and feasts at the American University in Paris. And so quite a few people became interested in that and came to the movement. After Kevin was in Paris, he went to India and was in Bombay for some period of time. And I happened to be in London at a bar association meeting, and I thought, well, that's real close to Bombay. I'll run over there. And so I visited him there, and that was extremely interesting. That was the summer of '71. That temple was headed by Madhuvisa, and not more than 10 people, maybe 10 or 12. And they lived in an apartment a good ways out from the center of town, but it was very interesting. The Pakistani embassy was on one floor, and they occupied a floor, and Ravi Shankar, the sitarist, lived on another floor. So it was kind of an interesting building. Again, that was early in the movement, but they were very well received because it was at a time when the Indian youth were straying away from their religious beliefs, and the parents were very upset about it. And so here were these American youths following their principles. So they invited them to speak and come to their homes to show an example of American youth. I don't remember any women in the group in Paris, but there were several women in Bombay. Tulsi, I remember, a small girl, and I don't remember that there was any difference in participation between the men and the women. I remember that Tulsi was a particularly dedicated and hard-working devotee, and there were some others in there too, but she's the one I remember personally. In the early 70s, I represented the Laguna chapter, or individuals in it. Seems to me Steve was one of them at one time, weren't you? Who got arrested for various things, various egregious crimes like chanting on the sidewalk and being on the beach and so forth. And I remember one young girl who was arrested for just such an egregious crime and kept overnight in jail and given a body search for chanting on the sidewalk. And I went before the city council several times. They were not well received at that time. It was a hard job. And I guess as a result of doing some of that, I became acquainted with Karanda, head of the LA temple. And I had a number of conversations with him, and he asked me if I would help Prabhupada with the book trust. And I said to the extent that I was capable, I would. And so he sent me a draft of the proposed trust prepared by an attorney in India, and then gave me verbally some of the ideas that Prabhupada wanted to incorporate in it. So I prepared a draft of the Bhaktivedanta book trust and sent it to Karanda to propose to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada came back with a number of questions and then invited me up. And so I think we went up within a few days in July of 71. And I had the honor to meet with Prabhupada privately and personally. When I say private, I'm quite sure Karanda was there. But it was very informal and very pleasant and very easy. There was no arrogance or ostentation about him whatsoever. And we didn't sit at an office austerely across from one another, but we sat in a back chamber and talked in a very congenial, personal manner. I asked him if he knew my son, Shritidas, and he said, "Isn't that the young brahmachari in Bombay?" I said, "Yes, that's him." And actually, I met with Prabhupada before I made that trip to Bombay, so I was sort of big stuff when I got there, to Bombay, and announced who I had just been with. And, so I prepared the book trust for him, and he had a number of things he wanted included. He was very clear. He had a lot of confidence in his trustees, which included Karanda and Shima Sundar. I don't know, I'm sure the London lady will know those people. Huh? Oh, to whom? Oh, well, I guess that scratches my next 4 paragraphs. Now, I enjoyed them very much, and Prabhupada had a great deal of confidence in their discretion, and he emphasized that he wanted them. I kept asking, do you want these limitations and these restrictions, and he did not. He had a lot of confidence in those trustees, and he wanted them to have the discretion, but he was very clear that the book trust should be handled as a separate entity, that the proceeds go 50% to the book fund, which would generate new books and printing and everything that had to do with the publications. I should say, you probably all know anyway, that at that point he assigned all his publications, all his writings and copyrights to the trust. And 50% of the proceeds then were to go to the book fund and 50% to the building fund to be used for acquisition of new properties and improvement of properties for temples all over the world. And then, curiously enough, he asked, I have notes that he, when I was visiting him, that he asked me to incorporate a provision that in the discretion of the trustees, they could make donations to other charitable contributions, whatever, having nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. And so that was hopefully the beginning of that. I was very privileged and honored to have met with him, but his demeanor with me was so easy and warm and friendly and personal that it didn't seem like a big job at all. He made me very comfortable from the outset. I think I'm becoming inelegant, which means not short and not sweet. See if I had anything. Oh, one last comment on my travels. I visited Kevin in South Africa when there were just Rishi Kumar and Shuti Das were there, and as I recall, Prabhupada had given them a large supply of books for distribution in Durban and Johannesburg. And they were the only two devotees with this pile of books. And they were very well received there, too, by the Indians. There was, when we flew into, my husband and I flew into Durban, there were several very prominent businessmen there to meet us, and it stayed in my mind for a long time because apartheid was much in evidence in those days. And so these very, very fine-looking people accompanied us to our hotel, and we invited them in, and of course they couldn't come in because apartheid applied to Indians as well as to blacks and any minorities. And so my husband at that time, who was quite a gagster, changed our room wherever it was and put it up where the suites were up near the top, and took them around to the back elevator, and we smuggled them in. And they came up, and they were delightful people. And I think that you met with some of them, didn't you, on a trip over there? Some of those people are since very much involved in the new temples that have been built there. Then after Rishi Kumar left, Kevin stayed on and sold the whole package before he came home. That's right, you were. That's right. Which is a compliment from that country. I'd just like to comment that I think the changes in the movement are so dramatic and so significant and so meaningful since those days that I've been telling you about. I think my objection in those days was the cloistered manner in which they were living and the isolation from society, and I didn't like that. I found that very difficult, and I think there was a great deal of opposition from people in general who never took the time to find out what was going on, and now today you all still retain the same values and apply them, but you apply them in every aspect of society, business and social, and I think that's extremely meaningful for your movement as well as productive for society in general. I think I've cut somebody's speech down short. Thank you.
For those of you who have forgotten, my name is Vishaka Dasi. And for those perhaps who I've not yet had the pleasure to meet, my name is Vishaka Dasi. Since Prabhupada's, well, while Prabhupada was here and also since his departure, I was active for many years in Back to Godhead magazine as a photographer and writing some articles also. And I think Nandamukhi Prabhu mentioned my husband and I assisted my husband in making many documentary films relating to Krishna consciousness. So, in regard to the topic of how Srila Prabhupada empowered his daughters, I was thinking that Prabhupada himself very often set the standard that he would speak from a verse, either Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita. So I was trying to think, what is a verse that would be applicable to this topic? And I'm sure there are many, but the one that I thought of was the one that is familiar to all of us from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Sang Saradaba Ladalita Loka Janaya Karuna Ganaganatvam Praptasya Kalyana Gunarnavasya Vande Gurosri Charanarnavinda. That the spiritual master is compared to a rain cloud, Ganaganatvam. Just like now it's about to rain, and we can see the rain will fall on the water where it will have no effect, and it will also fall on the park next door where the trees will be nurtured and the flowers and the grass. But nonetheless, the spiritual master's rain of mercy is there equally for everyone, just like the rain cloud. Does not discriminate where it falls. And it is really up to the recipient how much he or she is empowered by his mercy, by his transcendental knowledge. So, in that regard, it's up to the recipient whether we're going to take advantage of this transcendental knowledge that is coming so liberally and so profusely from the spiritual master, or if we're going to simply be like the water where there is no, perhaps, effect, at least not right away. And it's not just for us here, not just for his daughters, equally for his sons, equally for his granddaughters and grandsons and great-granddaughters and great-grandsons, and for generations that are not yet born. That mercy is equal to everyone. You cannot say that it will be less in 5,000 years than it is today. So that is the great munificence of Srila Prabhupada, that he does not discriminate. He never discriminated. Thank you. He said himself in the beginning of his Srimad Bhagavatam that the spiritual master lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. Excuse me. So, then the next question would be, following sequentially, okay, given that his daughters have the equal opportunity, the equal possibility of empowerment as Srila Prabhupada himself gave to everyone, then what is their role? What did he see them doing in Krishna's service? And certainly from my reading of his books and also from my observation of him personally, he wanted his daughters to be humble and chaste, to be surrendered and to be protected, for one. He also wanted us to be Krishna-conscious single women or mothers or wives. And he also wanted us to preach with our life, with our wealth, our intelligence, and our words. I think this cannot be misconstrued in any way. Prabhupada got a letter from his spiritual master, December 14th, 1936, in which he repeated the instruction that he had given to Prabhupada in 1922, saying, "You please preach this Krishna consciousness movement to the people of the English-speaking world. This will be good for you, and it will be good for those who help you." So Prabhupada's vision was that the people who came to him, whatever we may have thought our disqualifications, his vision was that we were being sent by Krishna, being sent by his spiritual master. And in that light, he accepted us despite everything, despite our ineptness. And he engaged us according to our capacity and propensity in Krishna's service. And this was our glory, that we were able to be engaged in that way. So, in looking at the different qualifications that Prabhupada wanted his daughters to have, on the one hand you have humility, chastity, surrender, being protected. On the other hand, to be vibrant preachers in some capacity, so that we could help him push on the mission of his spiritual master. Is there any dichotomy between those two paths? And in thinking about that, I thought actually quite the opposite, that they are totally complementary. That if you look at, for instance, humility, in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has a list of qualities. He goes on for 5 verses. qualities that he considers knowledge, and he says everything else is considered ignorance. So the very first one is amanitvam, humility. And the second one, adamvitvam, pridelessness. So this is actually, to be a potent preacher of Krishna consciousness, one must be humble. It's like an inverse barometer. The less one is humble, the more one can know that he has not yet, or she has not yet realized the greatness of Krishna and the smallness of oneself. And take chastity. There's another verse where Krishna says, those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. So that is the epitome of chastity. Just like Srila Prabhupada, although he acted in so many different spheres of activity, his aim was to fulfill the instructions of his spiritual master. And that way he was totally chaste. Whereas the absence of chastity means the mind is fickle. You have this goal, then you have that goal. And similarly, you take surrender. Of course, the epitome, the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita is abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I will deliver you, I will protect you from all sinful reactions. And protection, that's one of the items of surrender. That there are 6 items of surrender, like to accept everything favorable for devotional service, to reject everything unfavorable for devotional service, to feel maintained by the Lord. So similarly, to feel protected by the Lord is one of the aspects of surrender, one of the items. So women are expected to have this in the relative world in relation to their husbands, in relation to their father. But that's like a rehearsal for the real role. So if you're rehearsing for the real role, where is the disadvantage? It's actually an advantage. So in that way, there's no dichotomy between these two. I expressed two, I'm sure there are many more, but Prabhupada wanted certainly these aspects of his daughters to develop, and there's no difference. They're both quite complementary. Now, I was born spiritually. I got initiated in India, and my formative years also were in India. And my early experiences with Srila Prabhupada were also in India, so that very much, just like in the Western understanding, your formative years form the foundation for your rest of your life. So similarly, in spiritual life, I think it's maybe a little similar. And in India, Prabhupada would regularly call on his women. You'll be hearing from Malati and Kaushalya. He would regularly call on us to speak, to sing. He wanted that. That pleased him. Occasionally he would mention, just see your counterparts in India. They're a queen of the house. They're worshipping their deities. They're having perhaps a Krishna conscious family. And yet they don't go out beyond the house. But just see my students, my daughters. They're preaching widely. This pleased him. He was happy for that. And he didn't just ask, sometimes he insisted. In India, and probably throughout, you could say, but I felt it in India, it was very much of a can-do mentality. Prabhupada had the ability to see what we were capable of doing, and he would induce us, he would ask us to do that. And there was no such thing as can't. I can't do it. We simply relied on Krishna and we tried our best. That was his empowerment of us also. So there's one incident, I think you'll be hearing more details from the other speakers, but I would like to mention specifically one incident I remember that to me is very significant, both historically and also the implications beyond the historical event. In the beginning, in the early days, we used to rent a large plot of land right in the center of Bombay and erect a pandal, like a huge tent. We could accommodate 20,000 people. So the program, we had deities there, it was like a temple. We had Mangal Arati, morning program, and Prabhupada would speak in the morning and the evening. And the standard was, in the evening, there would be a full kirtan with Arati. Prabhupada would lecture, and then a last kirtan, and then prasadam. And the last kirtan was always led by Jamuna. This was the standard. And at the same time, there were many men who were very qualified and expert at leading kirtans. And after a while, Jamuna felt their hunger for leading this kirtan. And she responded, although she loves to lead, and she's very qualified. I'm sure most of us are aware of that. And also she had a unique ability to draw the audience into the holy name, chanting. But she responded by being reticent. If they are so anxious, I'll step down, they can lead. So after the lecture, this one particular day, we were changing from the lecture mode to the kirtan mode. Prabhupada was getting his kartals and readjusting the microphone. The devotees were readjusting the microphones. And he looked over to Jamuna with a little nod, indicating that now she was to lead. And this particular day, she decided that she had laryngitis and someone else could take over. And she did that with sign language. They were sitting, some feet apart. It was very clear, but Prabhupada responded like he didn't understand what she had said. So again, there was a little nod to her, and again she said, there's no way and he again just ignored it. This is the time you're leading, and there's no question of cannot do. It's a can-do mentality. So she was obliged to lead, and the men, like Hansaduta was there, Achyutananda, Dinanath, all very qualified to do the service, but he wanted her. He was very clear, focused. So in my mind's eye, I was thinking, had Prabhupada not been there, first of all, to establish that she led the final kirtan, and then to insist, despite her protests, she was going to lead the final. If he had not insisted, the men would have been vying with each other. She would have been totally out of the picture. They would have just been arguing with each other who's going to lead. So my vision is that that in our scenario where Prabhupada is no longer, perhaps in one sense, personally sitting on the Vyasasana, and perhaps inadvertently, the men have started vying with each other and not being able to encompass the women in their vision of also being able to contribute, and the women, perhaps out of a natural reticence, have allowed them to go on. But perhaps this meeting is an occasion where we're saying, no, we're also here, we would also like to contribute. Please allow us. Please be Prabhupada's nod to us. You do it.
Hare Krishna. Please accept my respectful obeisances. After that, I think I should just sit down now. Shaka's said so nicely. Of course, in my situation in Columbus and Louisville, we're always very happy to have a dhoti come and lead kirtan because we do it every day. So, But actually, just recently when Padma Goswami was visiting in Columbus, and all the girls from all the centers, the different centers the traveling parties were in, and everybody was feeling really enthusiastic, and a fairly remarkable kirtan took place. And there was also other Prabhus and Sankirtan parties, the dhotis were there, as we say. And but this kirtan was being led by one Mataji. It was following Guru Puja, and it just kept enveloping, and pretty soon everybody in a dhoti was like on the side of the wall. And even Padma Goswami was on the side of the wall. But it was a very friendly, just spontaneous thing, but it was, I guess you could say, pretty wild. And afterwards, one of the men came up and said to me, he says, "Now I know what the women feel like." But actually, early on, it just really wasn't that way for us. I remember the first time we heard that things were a little different, I was in London, and we heard that there was maybe a different position for women, but we couldn't believe it because we were in London and we were just trying to get this temple for Prabhupada, so we kind of discounted it. And then after London, we got sent to, some of us, to India, and when you're breaking new ground, you don't have so much time to consider some of these things. And so, anyways, it kind of it happened, not as far as I could experience through Prabhupada. It happened following Prabhupada. But the topic, how Prabhupada empowered us, I see it personally more how he encouraged us, that he never discouraged us. That was my personal experience. And that took place in so many dimensions. How he sent us to England. And it wasn't that he sent our husbands and we went along. He sent us, all of us. It was a very united front. And there was definitely no question of dominancy in that early group of pioneers in England. You know, we were all pulling and digging and pushing together. That's how things were happening. On a personal experience in Sridham Mayapur at the cornerstone laying ceremony, Srila Prabhupada was there with his godbrothers were there of his, and his young sannyasis were there with their dandas, and the Matajis were there, and it came time for someone to speak. Srila Prabhupada looked around, and we were all thinking, who's going to speak? You know, so many qualified speakers were there, and he looked at me and asked me to speak. And I don't know, I'm not a particularly brilliant speaker. I was, at the time, just being in Prabhupada's presence with his godbrothers there, and just the whole atmosphere, that cornerstone laying ceremony was very heady, you know. You just felt very quiet within yourself and glad to be there. So the idea of getting up and speaking in front of these great exalted personalities, but there was no question of even considering that to, you know, just, you felt that for a flicker, but Prabhupada is saying to get up and speak, and you have to respond to the request of your spiritual master. And I could only speak about Srila Prabhupada in front of these exalted Vaishnavas. What could I say? But afterwards, I remember Gargamuni Maharaj at the time came up and he thanked me and he said, that was so nice, what you said about Srila Prabhupada. You know, but I was feeling that actually it was Srila Prabhupada. You know. And on another occasion in Juhu, I can't remember the year, but it was in the early part when we were still living in tents, but there was some congregation of life members and supporters, and Prabhupada was trying to rally them around to come forward to help get this project out of the tents and into the realities, and we were there. And then he looked around, he wanted someone to speak, and everybody was looking at Tamal Krishna. Prabhupada looked at me and said, you speak. And I had my daughter. She was maybe 2.5 at the time. And the only person there was Tamal Krishna. So he got my daughter and I had to speak. Then after that, I went back, I got my daughter, and then Srila Prabhupada asked Tamal Krishna to speak. Following that. So, you know, he definitely was, I don't think he saw it as the male-female issue. He saw it as spreading Krishna consciousness. And for me, that's all it's ever been. And that's, in my center, that's all we're trying to do. And when I started that service, I wasn't thinking, well, I'll have a Mataji Mandir. It just kind of happened that way. It wasn't precisely what I had in mind. And the mood there is simply to serve Srila Prabhupada. And at the same time, we understand we have these particular bodies. There's times when we have to be reticent. And there's times when, you know, there's no boundaries to the display of enthusiasm. And there's no limit to the courage that's available in the hearts of those devotees, male or female, who want to serve Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was also extremely sensitive to all of his devotees and to his lady disciples. One devotee in New Vrindavan who's his disciple, but because the disciples didn't always get to see Srila Prabhupada so often, she only had one personal exchange. But I remember this because she told this to me, and she's a wonderful devotee. Her name is Gopalashapriya. Many of you may know her and her husband Damodar from your visits in New Vrindavan. So Srila Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan, and all the devotees were there sitting around his lotus feet. And it was a little chilly, and he looked and he saw that she had just arrived and she didn't have a sweater on. He said, "Are you all right? Are you warm enough?" And that was the only words he ever personally spoke to her. But that acknowledgement of her presence and concern for her condition locked the love for Srila Prabhupada forever within her heart. And Srila Prabhupada was capable of responding to a devotee in a crowd just as if no one else was there. At one point I had come to see him. I was at the time in Amsterdam, and I was leaving Amsterdam, and I came to the farm in Paris, outside of Paris. And I went into a room, and there was a darshan going on, and I came in quietly into the room. But suddenly he said, "Oh, Malati, you are here." You know, just immediately acknowledging. And sometimes I think, even as women, we're afraid to acknowledge each other. I don't think the problem is completely, men and women. I think even as Matajis, we have difficulty acknowledging each other. And I think if we work on this, the other difficulty, when and where it exists, will resolve itself. But we can take the cue from Srila Prabhupada and not be afraid to express our love and affection to each other. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I am Jyotirmayi Dasi. I'm from France. So I do not know a lot of them, and I do also know a lot of you in the sense that I was in America earlier, and I've been able now to see again a lot of the old friends that I didn't see for 15 or 20 years. So my connection with Prabhupada was mainly in France, even though I did also meet him in America, but it was mainly in France because of the service I was doing in France. So when I first met Prabhupada, it was in '69, but it was in London. And then later he came to when we had the temple in Paris. So he came for the first time in Paris. It was in '71. So at that time, Prabhupada gave to me and my husband the responsibility for the French publication. So I was responsible for doing the translation of the French book. So there is something particular there about the fact how these devotees were saying how Prabhupada was always giving the responsibilities of what has to be done to whoever was available, whoever was able to do it, without making any distinction, whether it was a woman or a man. So he had me do the translation work, and I did it for some years. And this translation work, translation, the actual writing for the books, the BBT work, because unfortunately, even though Prabhupada had that attitude toward the women, but it was not everybody's attitude, especially when Prabhupada was less present. And later on, that same service that was given to me directly by Prabhupada was taken away from me under the plea that I was a woman. And 20 years later, I was given back again that service because at that time it was accepted again that women could take responsibilities. But this is how we can see how it was not Krishna's will that I be taken away from that service, is that 20 years later I had to correct all the mistakes that were done in these translations 20 years before, because that service had been taken away from me. So in that translation work, Prabhupada gave responsibility, even though it's a big responsibility, as it is the books that are going to be distributed all over the world to all the people. And I was also translating, not in a book form, but in the verbal form, translating when Prabhupada was lecturing. So he would come and both give classes to the devotees, and he would also speak in public, either to people that we would bring, important people, you know, especially in the academic fields, and also some in the political field that we would bring to him. And I was translating for Prabhupada's talks with these people. Sometimes it was me, sometimes it was, like again, Prabhupada didn't make any difference. Sometimes it was me doing it, sometimes it was Yogeshwar doing it, sometimes it was another devotee, Prituputra, doing it. So men or women, he would ask anybody who was there and was able to do it. So I would translate for him when he would discuss with these people privately in the temple, or when he would give lectures. And at that time, he gave some lectures to small groups of people in universities or in different programs that we had arranged for him. And I would translate, and sometimes it would be to big crowds of people. Like one of the programs we did at that time was in a big city hall, hall in Paris, where 1,800 people came, and I was translating for Prabhupada while he was lecturing. And I even noticed that Prabhupada was so kind to the person, so concerned with the person who was doing the translation for him, that at the very beginning, because he saw the first times we did it, that it was a little difficult, you know, if he would speak for a long time for me to translate everything. So he was so concerned that first he spoke very short sentences so I could translate, and then when he saw that I was able to, more at ease and able to translate longer, then he would make the sentences longer. So I translated like that many times for Prabhupada in these public lectures. And this also, again, this is one of the things that, even though Prabhupada directly had me do this kind of a service, later on it was decided by the leaders that it was not good to have a woman translate publicly like that, and I was taken out of that service also, so that a man would do it. So there was this kind of service for Prabhupada, and there was also some smaller things where Prabhupada also would not make any differences, man or woman. It would just be according to what he noticed, would someone who was good at doing this or that. It was, you know, that for Srimad Bhagavatam class we always repeat the Sanskrit before. And at that time we were all very new devotees, so devotees didn't pronounce very well the Sanskrit. And it happened that when I was in America, I had learned from Nitai how to pronounce the Sanskrit. So when we all recited the Sanskrit, Prabhupada noticed that I was able to pronounce better than the others. So when he noticed that, he immediately said, so now from now on, each time you say the Sanskrit verse before Srimad Bhagavatam class, it has to be Jyotirmaya who will lead the Sanskrit pronunciation so that the others can learn. So this is another example. Then there was also the public relation work. At that time also I was doing that service, which was to bring important people to come to see Prabhupada, or to make arrangement for him to preach in different places. And one of the places where we did it was the City Hall of Paris. So at that time it was very extraordinary that the mayor, the person under the mayor, would invite an Indian leader in Paris to come and be officially received. And so I was also translating for Prabhupada. So this is mainly what I did for him. Yeah, another thing also, where he showed also no discrimination at all. And also especially I give these two examples because after the first days in the movement, when things started to change for the women, it started, at least for us in France, it started around 73, 74, but it might have started earlier in America, because everything that happens in America comes to Europe a few years after. So it followed, and it came to us in Europe a little later on. So Srila Prabhupada was, I was translating for Srila Prabhupada for these lectures. Excuse me, I mean, it's in front of so much people that I've a little forgotten what I wanted to say. So I go to the next point. For the classes, when then it will come back to me. For the classes in the temple. So when I came to the temple, everybody was leading kirtans, everybody was giving classes, like they were explaining, you know, giving classes in front of the public or giving classes in the temple. It was the same for everyone. So when I came, because everybody was doing it, then I just followed and did the same. So I was giving classes, I was leading kirtans. And then came, so from America, the point that the women could not give classes anymore. So this again came to Prabhupada, and he, in two different occasions, he personally told me that yes, I could give classes, that there was no difference, that it was not that the women could give classes. And so it happened personally to me that I did ask him, or another time I wrote him to ask him about the women giving classes, and he personally said that it was no, that the women could give classes, that I could give classes. And yeah, the example is coming back to me now. Very often what came later on in the years is that it was said that the women were not intelligent enough to do all kind of services or to take responsibilities. So in my particular experience with Prabhupada, he didn't have this attitude with the women that they were too stupid or too unintelligent to take such or such service. And at one moment, Yogeshwar asked Prabhupada about university, studying in university, because before I joined the movement, I was studying ethnology in university. And I was studying so that I would have been able later on to teach Indian philosophy, because I was learning Indian philosophy and other philosophies and cultures also in university. But when I joined the movement, I stopped my studies in university. And so Yogeshwar asked Prabhupada about if I should go on with this university study, so that later on I will be able to teach Vaishnavism in the Sorbonne, which the Sorbonne is the best known university in France. So he asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada answered, yes, she can do it, she is a very intelligent girl. So you see, Prabhupada didn't have this attitude that women are not intelligent and cannot do this or that. And in another occasion, he did the same again. It was about the Gurukul. I was teaching in the headmistress in the Gurukul, teaching, ashram teacher, leading the Gurukul, everything. We did everything at that time. So we had discussion with Prabhupada about Gurukul. And at one moment also he said the same thing. I don't remember exactly what was the instance, but at one moment when talking and Bhagavan was there and Yogeshwar was there, and at one moment he said again, you are a very intelligent girl. So that's another thing about the, now that we're talking about the Gurukul. Gurukul headmistress was a big responsibility, and Prabhupada didn't make any objection to a woman being the headmistress. And I was, for the time he was there, and we met him, we came with the children, and we had discussion, everything. But that again, later on, there was no question anymore to have women headmistress. And it come again much later on that women could again be headmistress of the school, but there was a large period of time where it was not allowed anymore. And another thing I would like to say is about the concern of Prabhupada for the devotees. Like Bharati was saying, very personally concerned with the people, and intimately concerned. And that I noticed that, of course, when I came, at the beginning we were very close to Prabhupada, but then as the years were passing by, you know, there was so many more initiated disciples, so many more temples, so it was not as easy anymore to be so close to Prabhupada as it was in the first years. And then there was so many devotees that, especially for us in France, Prabhupada that after would come only once a year in France. So But I noticed, because that personal relationship, at one moment I thought, well, now he has so many disciples, he comes only once a year in France, he has so many temples. So I thought he would have forgotten me, you know, because it was too many people, and I was not one of the first ones who joined. So those like Malati or those Jamuna, those he knew really, really intimately. But that's why I was very astonished and so happy to see that even though he had such a large number of devotees, he would not forget them. And when he would come to France, either if he would see me, he would ask me directly, but if he didn't see me, then he would always ask someone, the GBC there, or he would ask Yogeshwar, who would say, so how is Jyotirmayi, how is she doing? He would ask like that about my well-being and how I was doing. And about that particular concern also, one time also this astonished me. It was almost, it was in 76, so he was very sick. He came for the last time in France. And in fact, we thought he would not have come because he was so sick, but finally he came anyway. He wanted to see all his devotees before his departure. So he came, despite his sickness, to France. It was in New Mayapur. And at that time, I was doing the Gurukul, and I had not been with him so closely as before when I was doing the public relation, that I was always with him, presenting him the people, translating for him. So I was more, you know, separate. I didn't see him as much, except later on when I met him to discuss about the Gurukul. So again, I thought that I would have been lost in the thousands of disciples, and I was again very pleased and astonished also to see that so I had not seen him since a year, and he was walking down the hallway with plenty of devotees following, and myself busy with my service. At one moment with the children in the Gurukul, I happened to walk and to cross his path. And as soon as he saw me, he stopped everybody, and he stood with me for a few minutes to talk to me and ask how I was doing and like that. So Prabhupada was very, very personal like that with the devotees, whether they were men or women. It didn't make any difference. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me. I feel very, very fortunate to have had the opportunity and the blessing to have been able to spend a lot of time with Srila Prabhupada. I was looking for spiritual realization in my own life when I first met him, and many of you have probably heard the story. A flyer flew by which said he was speaking on the Bhagavad Gita, and so I went to hear him speak. And when I met Prabhupada, I immediately knew that he was the person who could answer all my questions. But the thing that struck me the most about Srila Prabhupada, and when I first met him, I didn't even realize there was a Hare Krishna movement. But the first thing that struck me was his kindness, his warmth, his wisdom, and his love. And I didn't at any point on any of my many times that I spent with Srila Prabhupada feel that he saw me as a woman. I don't think he ever thought, oh, there's Kaushalya, a woman. Prabhupada saw us all as spirit souls. And on the topic of discussion, which is how did he empower his daughters, I have to say that I feel he empowered us in the same way he empowered all of us. I don't think there was a distinction. And in those early days, and I was, you know, fortunate enough to go to India when we first went in 1970 with Malati and Jamuna and Himavati and Madri. That was all. There was just 5. Oh, and Saraswati, of course. She was a baby. But there was 5 women, very small number of women. And the thing that struck me the most at that time was that Prabhupada cared so much about us that wherever we were going, he would always make sure, where are the women? Where are the women? And when we first went to India, we were in Bombay. Then from there we went to Amritsar. And in Amritsar, it's the Sikhs' holiest city, and they have a large golden temple, and it was like a Swami conference. There was, I don't know how many Swamis, but there were many Swamis speaking. Prabhupada was one of them. And we stayed in an ashram situation, and it was just Jamuna and I at that time, because I think Malati stayed in Bombay, along with Himavati and Madri. So it was just the two of us. And so there was a large ashram complex. We got there. How are we going to live? Because there was like 2 rooms. There was one little room on this side, one little room on this side, and there must have been about 10 men, me and Jamuna and Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, well, of course, the girls will take this room, and I will take this room, and the rest of you can sleep on the grounds. So he immediately took us and made sure that we were always taken care of. And it struck me so intensely because at every presentation program that we were invited to, Prabhupada would always have us ride in the car with him, and everybody else had to find their own way. So he was very protective, and he was very caring and very loving, and he never at any point made me feel like a second-class citizen because I was female. Quite the contrary. I forgot what I was. I didn't know I was female in those days. I didn't think of myself as a female or a male. I just thought of myself as Prabhupada's servant. And I think that that's really how he empowered us, is that we lost these bodily designations when we were around him. He gave us enough vision and strength to realize we really are spirit souls, and these bodies are merely a temporary housing of the soul. And so when we were with Prabhupada, as Vishaka so elegantly put, it was a can-do situation. There was never a situation where, oh, gee, they're women, they can't do that. It was always they can do. We were riding once on the train, and I think this was on our way back from Amritsar. And Jamuna and I were riding in 3rd class, or 2nd class, or whatever it was, with all the other devotees. And Prabhupada had gotten a 1st class ticket, which was appropriate. And I think Guru Das was in the compartment with him, and I believe, I can't remember who else was there, but at any rate, Prabhupada called for us. So Jamuna and I came into the cabin, and he said, you know, I really want rice. And you may have all heard this story. But we were riding on a train, and and it was like, how are we going to get you rice? But Jamuna was my great god sister example, because she's older than me, and I was only at the time like 19 years old, so I was a child, you know. And she said, oh, of course, Srila Prabhupada, we can do it. And I'm thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? So we went away, and both of us consulted. We said, how are we going to do this? We're on a train. The train's like going. We found the one dirty little kitchen on this train. And Jamuna said, we have to make rice for my spiritual master. And they, oh, no, 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 you cannot do that. You cannot cook in the kitchen. This is just for the train use, official use only. No, you must not do that. So she said, no, 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 I must do it. I must do it. And I'm standing there watching, and he says, no, 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 you can't do it. And there's this, I must, and back and forth and back and forth. We're standing in the Indian trains, you know, there's where the 2 cars are together, there's that opening, and it's shaken, and we're standing there arguing, and Jamuna walks to the door of the train and says, if you don't let me do it, I'm going to throw myself off this train. And I'm going, oh my God. And she was serious about it. I mean, she had this like real intensity, and it was wonderful. I know she'd share this story with you if she was here. Anyway, so the guy, oh, no, 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 ma'am, stop, don't do that. All right, all right, all right. So he let us do it. We went in there, you know, got up to our elbows in filth because this kitchen was really dirty. And we had to scrub these giant pots. Anyway, somehow, after all of this effort, we came in with a big platter of rice. And you know Bengalis, they like rice. So we brought Prabhupada this big mound of rice. And he smiled. He never even asked us how we managed it, because he knew that somehow, since he had given us the task, we would figure it out. And sure enough, we did, and he ate every bite of it. So in all these situations, Prabhupada was absolutely 100% behind our ability to succeed. And so, to me, the greatest form of respect and love of our Guru is emulation, not imitation. We don't need to imitate him. We need to emulate his qualities. We need to emulate those qualities that say, Prabhupada was fearless. We should also be fearless as we go forward in our life, both spiritual life and material life. We should be fearless with our efforts and our ability to teach other people about Krishna. So that was a great lesson for me. Prabhupada empowered us in so many ways. I mean, I could go on, but we only have a limited amount of time. But I remember another time when Prabhupada sent Srimati and I to get deities for the temples here in the United States. This was right after the Delhi Pandal, which brings me to another story. I'm going to backtrack for a second. We were having the Delhi Pandal, and it was during the Bangladesh war, the war, you know, between Pakistan and India. And America had sided with Pakistan in this particular conflict. And so every night there were blackouts. And Prabhupada was getting very discouraged because we had to have all the lights out. And so we would sit, you know, in the dark, and even sometimes if there was a candle or two lit, we would get chastised by someone would say, no, you have to have blackout, everything. So he was frustrated with it. So I came up with this idea to put black paper on the windows of our place so that we could turn on the lights and Prabhupada could see and lecture and speak after the evening program, because this was in the winter. So I did it as a surprise. I put the black paper on the window, and then I turned on the light that night, and Prabhupada beamed. He said, oh, what have you done? I said, I've put black paper on the window so we can have the lights on. And he said, this is first-class intelligence. He said, first-class intelligence is you see a need and you do it. Second-class intelligence is I tell you what to do and you do it nicely. To teach other people about Krishna. So that was a great lesson for me. Prabhupada empowered us in so many ways. I mean, I could go on, but we only have a limited amount of time. But I remember another time when Prabhupada sent Srimati and I to get deities for the temples here in the United States. This was right after the Delhi Pandal, which brings me to another story. I'm going to backtrack for a second. We were having the Delhi Pandal, and it was during the Bangladesh war, the war, you know, between Pakistan and India. And America had sided with Pakistan in this particular conflict. And so every night there were blackouts. And Prabhupada was getting very discouraged because we had to have all the lights out. And so we would sit, you know, in the dark, and even sometimes if there was a candle or two lit, we would get chastised by someone would say, no, you have to have blackout, everything. So he was frustrated with it. So I came up with this idea to put black paper on the windows of our place so that we could turn on the lights and Prabhupada could see and lecture and speak after the evening program, because this was in the winter. So I did it as a surprise. I put the black paper on the window, and then I turned on the light that night, and Prabhupada beamed. He said, oh, what have you done? I said, I've put black paper on the window so we can have the lights on. And he said, this is first-class intelligence. He said, first-class intelligence is you see a need and you do it. Second-class intelligence is I tell you what to do and you do it nicely. Third-class intelligence is I tell you what to do, you run out, say, yes, Srila Prabhupada, and then you come back and say, what was I supposed to do? One of the other things, which reminds me of this particular situation, is Prabhupada had a tremendously heavenly sense of humor. He always made us laugh. He was very grave when he was lecturing or debating with some of the different swamis that he often did. But in personal relations, he was very loving, very warm, and very funny. And that's one of the things I really always remember about him. So he sent Srimati and I to Jaipur to pick up marble deities for all of the, for several temples, New York. I can't think of the other ones. Anyway, So we went to Jaipur. It was during the war, as I said. And Srimati, and we checked into this hotel, just the two of us. And neither one of us had ever been to Jaipur. Again, empowerment, right? And we checked into this hotel, and they said, let me see your passports. And Srimati had forgotten her passport back in Delhi. So they said, okay. So the next morning, the most important thing to us was to get up at the crack of dawn and go over to Govinda Dev Ji's for Mangalarti. So we did that because we arrived kind of late in the day, and then we went to sleep, got up early, took a rickshaw over to the temple, and went to Mangalarti. And I started singing bhajans right after the deities' doors were closed to the deities as they were getting dressed for their next darshan. And everybody started gathering around, and the priests of the temple gathered around, and they said, oh, you know, we told them all about Srila Prabhupada, and they realized we were American girls in Jaipur singing Indian bhajans, and it was very interesting to them. So we met the pujari of the temple, and he said, you know, you must come and visit me at my home. So we wrote down his name and telephone number, and then we took our rickshaw back to the hotel. Got to our room, and a few seconds after arriving in our room, there was a knock on the door. It was the police. The police had been informed because we had arrived without one passport, and they assumed that since we were Americans, we might be spies. So they were going to take us to jail. And actually, they did take us to the police station, because you can't be traveling around India without a passport, especially during this war, you know, it was like really crazy. So they took us to the police station, and they said, you're under arrest. And I said, you can't arrest us. We know the pujari of Govindaji's temple. You have to, he'll vouch for us. We're devotees. And like going on and on and on, and I happened to have his number, so they called him, and sure enough, he vouched for us, and we moved into the pujari's home with his family and children. We could not, there was an injunction, we could not leave Jaipur until that passport arrived. So we had to get a hold of the Delhi temple, get the passport over to Jaipur, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and everything was moving very, very slow. So in the 3 weeks that we were, you know, had to stay in Jaipur, I got on a program of every day, every morning I'd sing my bhajans at Govindaji's temple. Bigger and bigger crowds would come. Eventually it got so big that we were clogging the whole front area. So they had us use the whole side area, and I had regular morning program, just like Srila Prabhupada. And all I could talk about was Srila Prabhupada. And as it mushroomed, I was invited house to house to house. And Srimati, meanwhile, was very busy getting all these deities. And so I was pretty much alone, because she was doing that and I was doing this. Meantime, everybody's saying, we'd love to meet your guru, we'd love to meet your guru. So I said, if you'd love to meet my guru, then pay to bring him here. So gradually, every wealthy person in Jaipur contributed funds, and all the devotees came to Jaipur, and we had a Pandal program behind Govindaji's temple. It was the one where Tamal took sannyas. But at any rate, Prabhupada, when he got there, was very pleased that 2 women alone in a city they'd never been to were able to manifest an entire Pandal program. And he said it was a standard for ISKCON because it was the only Pandal where ISKCON did not pay 1 penny at all. The whole thing was financed by the people in the city. So again, I don't take credit for this. I merely say that Prabhupada, again, empowered me by saying, you girls go to Jaipur and get the deities. And of course, it was Krishna's mercy and Krishna's plan that Srimati left her passport and that all this happened. But Prabhupada never said, oh, you women can't do it. You're unable to do it. You're only women. So time and again, Prabhupada broke the rules. And one of the things I think a lot of devotees forget is that he was actually quite the rebel. In India, as Vishaka said, we did things that women didn't do. We did artiks. When we first were in India and were traveling around, I was taking care of Prabhupada's deities. Malati was cooking a lot of the times. We were all Prabhupada's servants. and this wasn't done, in public when we went to Amritsar during the first Kumbh Mela. I was doing the puja publicly. Jamuna was leading kirtans. Malati and Himavati were speaking. We were all empowered because there were no limitations placed on us. And I think that one of the most important things for the movement today is that if there are any limitations placed on anyone, they should be removed, because until we are free to be spirit souls, until we are free to manifest ourselves to our fullest, the fullest of our destiny, then the movement cannot grow. And women are an integral part of this movement. Women are an important part of this movement. It's a balancing energy that has been neglected and ignored. And I applaud you all. I'm not very active in ISKCON. I have my own, I'm doing my own thing right now, but I applaud all of you, and I appreciate you, you know, including me in your conference. But I applaud you in your efforts, and I pray, and I'm sure, with all of your wonderful energies combined, the movement will grow and mature beautifully with the help of all of these wonderful Vaishnavis.
I'd just like to open it up if there's anyone that has really a question that's important to them, something that they'd like to know before we move on to our next presentation. Madhusudani.
Sorry.
You have to speak loudly, Prabhu.
Okay. I've heard that women cannot be pujaris in ISKCON temples in India right now. And I always thought it was because it was bad PR and Indians would hate it because they're more traditional. That's what I had been told. Looks like Indians loved it. Does anybody up here have any comments on how that came to be? Well, I'm always a big blabbermouth. I'll say something.
She wanted to know why women are not pujaris in India today. When we first went to India, as I said, there was a very small group. There were 5 women. How many men were there in that group? Like about... Yeah, there was like 11. I mean, it was a small group. Prabhupada needed everybody. He did, as time went on, try and make it more traditional. But in the beginning, we were called upon to do all activities. I don't know if that was something that Prabhupada felt was necessary, so I can't speak for him. But I know that as time went on, women were restricted from being pujaris, but I guarantee you I was pujari many times in public with the sanction of Prabhupada. So I can't speak for why that dichotomy exists. I don't think the Indian people would object to it. There's pictures of me that Yadu Bharat and Vishaka took where I'm distributing prasadam after Arti at the Kumbh Mela. And there were hundreds of Indian people around happy to take prasadam from a lowly woman's hand. So I don't know. I don't think the Indian people would object. And considering the women's conditions in India today, I think they would probably applaud it.
From now on, can we get the questions at the mic, please?
Are there any other questions for this panel? All right, then I'd like to thank everyone who's attended this panel, and just in closing words, I'd really like to thank Marjay Lagaye. Oh, thank you so much for coming. It was wonderful because it adds a dynamic that we never had the chance to share or hear before, and it was wonderful for us. I know I'm speaking for everybody here. It was fantastic. And also for the other women who came at great, Jyotirmayi came all the way from France, of course. Kashalya had wonderful stories to share with us. Malati, it was a great austerity for her to be here with us because she's got 18 people or so under her care, and it's Christmas time, and they have a lot of things that they need to be doing right now. So this was not easy for her to be here with us today, so thank you, Malati, very much. And Vishaka for the austerity of speaking instead of just writing. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. Kanka, yes.
I have a woman's story with Srila Prabhupada that I'd like to share.
Please.
Okay. I was in the Laguna Beach temple with my child that was 6. Just put him on the front.
Anyway, this one's
I was in the Laguna Beach temple in 1973. Srila Prabhupada was sitting in that time it was the temple up on the hill. It was a small temple room, and in order to go out of the temple, you had to go past the Vyasasan. And at that time, the men had decided that the women should take the babies out. They were too disturbing at the lectures. So I was very attached to hearing Srila Prabhupada give the lecture. My baby was 6 months old. And I hid in the corner. And Tulsi Das saw me and he said, "Kanka, get out." So as I'm walking out of the temple room with my son, Krishna Kumar, Srila Prabhupada stopped me in front of the Vyasasan and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, I turned and I pointed to Tulsi Das. And I said, "Tulsi Das said I had to go out because of the baby." And Srila Prabhupada said, "No." He said, "You go sit down." And it was a wonderful lecture. And afterwards, Srila Prabhupada walked right up to me outside of the temple room and came up and patted my son on the head and gave me and shook his head. So I just wanted to share that with you.